I remember that Halloween night as if it were yesterday. It was the last night of October, and the air was cold. The moon was full, shining brightly against the dark sky. My friends and I, 4 teenagers looking for some excitement, decided to explore an old abandoned house on the edge of town. The house belonged to a woman named Mrs. Thompson. She had lived there for many years but passed away about a decade ago. They say her spirit still haunts the place, and strange sounds come from within its crumbling walls. Most people in town avoided it, but that only made it more interesting to us. We gathered at my house before heading out. It was just me, Jake, Sarah, and Liam. Jake was the brave one, always daring us to do crazy things. Sarah was more cautious, but usually went along with Jake. Liam was quiet, often getting dragged into things he didn't want to do. I, on the other hand, was somewhere in the middle, always looking for an adventure, but also a bit scared. "Are you sure we should go there?" Liam asked, biting his nails nervously. "Of course, it's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" Jake replied with a grin. "Maybe we'll find some treasure," Sarah added, her eyes sparkling with excitement. As we walked to the house, the wind howled around us, rustling the leaves on the ground. The trees looked like long, bony fingers reaching for the sky. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed it aside. We were here for fun, after all. When we finally reached the house, we stood in front of it, staring up at its dark windows. The door hung on its hinges, creaking in the wind. The paint was peeling, and the wooden boards were rotting. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "Let's go in," Jake exclaimed, pushing the door open. It swung wide with a loud groan, revealing a dark hallway inside. I hesitated for a moment, but the thrill of adventure pulled me in. I stepped inside, followed by the others. The air was stale, filled with the smell of mold and dust. Our flashlights flickered as we turned them on, casting long shadows on the walls. We moved cautiously down the hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet, and I could hear the sound of our breathing echoing in the silence. It was unnerving, but I tried to stay calm. "Check out this room," Sarah called, pointing to a door on the right. We all rushed over to her. Jake pushed the door open, and it swung wide, revealing a dusty old living room. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. "This place is creepy," Liam whispered, glancing around nervously. "It's perfect for Halloween," Jake said, clearly enjoying himself. He walked over to the fireplace and picked up an old rusty candlestick. "Look at this. We should take some stuff home." As he held it up, I noticed something strange. In the corner of the room, a shadow moved quickly across the wall. My heart raced. I thought I was imagining things. "Did you see that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "See what?" Sarah asked, looking confused. "Never mind," I replied, brushing it off. "Maybe it was just my imagination." We explored the room further, poking through the dust and old furniture. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang from somewhere deep inside the house. We all jumped, our eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" Liam asked, his voice trembling. "Probably just the wind," Jake said, though he sounded a bit unsure. "Let's check it out," Sarah suggested, her curiosity getting the better of her. We hesitated, but Jake nodded. "Come on, we can't just sit here. Let's go find out what it was." Reluctantly, we followed him down the hallway, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the empty house. We reached the end of the hallway, where another door stood closed. The banging had stopped, but an uneasy feeling hung in the air. Jake reached for the doorknob, but before he could turn it, the door suddenly swung open on its own. We all gasped, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did you do that?" Sarah asked, looking at Jake. No," he replied, looking just as surprised. I took a step back, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. The room beyond was dark, and we could barely see inside. I shone my flashlight into the room, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. "Should we go down?" Jake asked, his voice filled with excitement. "Are you crazy?" Liam shouted. "That's where all the scary stuff happens." "Oh, come on, it'll be fun," Jake insisted, already taking a step onto the first step of the staircase. I felt a pull to follow him. The darkness below felt like it was calling my name. I glanced at Sarah and Liam, who were both clearly nervous. "Let's stick together," I said, trying to sound brave. We descended the staircase slowly, the air growing colder with each step. The beam of my flashlight danced across the walls, revealing more cobwebs and dust. As we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a small cellar. The room was filled with old boxes and furniture covered in sheets. It smelled damp and musty, making me gag a little. My heart raced, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Look at this," Jake exclaimed, pointing to a box in the corner. He rushed over to it, lifting the lid to reveal a collection of old photographs. "Whoa, check these out," he said, holding up a faded picture of a woman. Her face was pale, and her eyes seemed to follow us as we moved. "Maybe it's Mrs. Thompson," Sarah suggested, peering over his shoulder. "Creepy," Liam muttered, glancing around the room nervously. As we examined the photos, I heard a soft whispering sound. It was faint, but it seemed to be coming from somewhere behind us. My heart began to pound in my chest. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Jake replied, still focused on the box. "It sounds like someone is whispering," I said, trying to listen more closely. "Stop messing around, Sam," Jake said, rolling his eyes. "It's just the wind." But the whispering grew louder, echoing around us. It was almost as if someone was trying to speak to us. I shivered, glancing at Sarah and Liam. They looked just as frightened as I felt. "We should go," I said, my voice shaking. "Come on, we're not leaving yet," Jake insisted, determined to explore. But as he spoke, the whispering turned into a low, haunting laugh. It sent chills down my spine. "Okay, I really think we should go," I said, backing away from the box. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room went dark. Our flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Panic set in, and we all turned our beams towards each other. "Stay close," Sarah shouted, gripping my arm tightly. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the room. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. We froze, fear gripping. "Jake, let's go," Liam yelled, panic rising in his voice. I could see the fear in Jake's eyes as he finally nodded. "Okay, let's get out of here." We turned to run back up the stairs, but as we did, the door slammed shut behind us. The sound was deafening, and we all screamed in unison. "No, no, no," Jake shouted, pulling on the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. "Help! Somebody help us!" I screamed, banging on the door. The whispering grew louder, now sounding like 1,000 voices chanting in an unknown language. It was overwhelming. I could feel my heart racing as I backed away from the door, panic rising. "We have to find another way out," Liam said, his voice shaking. Look!" Sarah pointed to a small window at the far end of the cellar. It was covered in grime, but it looked like it could open. "Let's try that," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. We rushed over to the window, pushing against the dusty frame. Jake and I pulled with all our strength, and finally, it creaked open. "We can escape," I said, feeling relieved. Just then, the door began to shake violently. The whispering grew louder, and I could hear the laughter again. "Quick, get through," Jake urged, pushing Sarah first. She scrambled through the window, and then Jake followed. I turned to Liam, who looked terrified. "Come on, Liam. You can do it," I shouted, helping him up. As he climbed through, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. It chilled me to the bone. I turned back, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a woman in a long, tattered dress, her eyes glowing in the darkness. "Sam, hurry!" Jake shouted, pulling me through the window. I didn't need to be told twice. I squeezed through the opening, feeling the cold air wrap around me. As soon as I landed on the ground outside, I turned to see the window slam shut behind me. We all stood there for a moment, panting heavily, our hearts racing. The house loomed ominously behind us, dark and silent. "Did you see that?" I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "See what?" Liam asked, his face pale. "The woman," "In the cellar," I said, trembling. "I didn't see anything," Jake replied, looking confused. "Me neither," Sarah added, glancing at the house nervously. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," Liam suggested, trying to calm us down. But deep down, I knew it was real. The whispers, the laughter, the figure, something was not right about that house. "We should get out of here," I said, feeling uneasy. We all agreed and started walking away, but as we turned to leave, I glanced back at the house one last time. The window we had just escaped from was now tightly shut, and I could have sworn I saw a shadow moving behind it. As we walked back to town, the moon hung high in the sky, casting eerie shadows on the ground. The night was still, but I could feel the weight of what we had just experienced hanging in the air. "Do you think Mrs. Thompson's ghost is real?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I replied, still shaken, "but I don't want to go back there ever again." Jake nodded in agreement, and Liam was quiet, lost in thought. When we finally reached the main street, the warmth of the streetlights felt like a welcome relief. We didn't talk much as we headed back to my house. I could tell everyone was feeling the same sense of dread. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I closed my eyes, but every time I tried to sleep, the whispers filled my mind. I felt like I could still hear the laughter echoing in the darkness. Days passed, and Halloween came to an end, but the memory of that night haunted me. I kept dreaming about the old house, the whispers, and the figure in the cellar. Each dream felt so real, like I was back there again. I could hear the laughter and see the pale face of the woman staring at me. One evening, I was hanging out with Jake and Sarah. We were sitting in my living room, trying to distract ourselves from the memories of that night. We laughed and talked, but I could see the unease in their eyes too. "Do you guys think we should tell anyone about what happened?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Who would believe us?" Jake replied, shaking his head. "Yeah, it sounds crazy," Sarah agreed. "Maybe we should just forget about it," I suggested. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. Just then, my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw a message from Liam. It read, "Guys, I can't stop thinking about that house. I think we need to go back." My heart raced. I quickly replied, "Are you serious?" He responded, "Yes. I feel like we left something behind." "Liam wants to go back," I said, showing the message to Jake and Sarah. Their eyes widened in shock. "Are you kidding me?" Jake exclaimed. "Hez crazy. We can't go back there." "I know, but Hez really insistent," I replied, feeling torn. "We should at least talk to him," Sarah suggested, looking worried. After a few minutes, we decided to meet Liam at the park nearby. As we walked over, I could feel a sense of dread creeping back. When we arrived, Liam was sitting on a bench, his face serious. "Hey," he said, looking up at us. "I really think we need to go back to the house. I feel like there's something we missed." "Liam, that's a terrible idea," Sarah exclaimed. "What if something happens to us?" "We can't just ignore it," he said, his voice urgent. "What if Mrs. Thompson needs help?" I looked at Jake and Sarah, unsure of what to say. "Maybe we can just take a quick look," I suggested hesitantly. "No way. We're not going back there," Jake said firmly. But Liam was determined. "We have to know the truth. We can't let fear control us." After a long discussion, we reluctantly agreed to go back one last time. We planned to go at midnight, the witching hour. As the night approached, I felt a knot in my stomach. We gathered flashlights and made our way to the house once more. The moon was full again, casting an eerie glow over everything. When we arrived, the house looked even scarier than before. Shadows danced around it, and the wind howled through the trees. "Let's get this over with," Jake said, his voice shaking a bit. We stepped inside, and the door creaked loudly behind us. The air was even colder than I remembered, sending shivers down my spine. "Psst," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's check the cellar again," Liam said, leading the way. We made our way down the dark staircase, our flashlights flickering nervously. The cellar felt even more oppressive than before, as if the air itself was thick with tension. "Liam, are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We have to find out what's really going on here," he replied, determination in his eyes. We started searching the room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The whispers returned, faint at first, but growing louder as we searched. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Yes," I replied, feeling my heart race. Suddenly, a cold wind rushed through the cellar, blowing out our flashlights. We were plunged into darkness, and I felt a surge of panic. "Turn them back on!" Jake shouted, his voice echoing in the silence. I fumbled with my flashlight, finally getting it to work. The beam flickered to life, illuminating the room once more. But then we saw it. The figure stood in the corner, the same woman in the tattered dress. Her face was pale, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. "Run!" I screamed, my heart pounding in my chest. We bolted for the stairs, but the door slammed shut again. We pounded on it, desperate to escape. The whispers turned into loud screams, echoing in our ears. "Someone help us!" Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. Just then the woman stepped forward, her expression twisted in anguish. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. I felt a strange pull toward her, as if she were trying to communicate something important. "Wait," I shouted, turning back to her. "What do you want?" She pointed to the boxes in the corner, and I felt a surge of understanding. "The photos," I realized. "She wants us to find something." "Are you crazy?" Jake shouted. "We need to get out of here." But I couldn't ignore her. I rushed over to the boxes, digging through the old photographs. I found a picture of the woman as a young girl smiling brightly. She looked so happy, so alive. "What happened to you?" I whispered, feeling a deep sadness wash over me. Some shook violently, and the whispers turned into angry shouts. I felt like the very walls were closing in on us. "Sam, come on!" Liam yelled, pulling me back. But I couldn't leave. I had to understand what she wanted. I picked up another photo, and this one showed the woman standing in front of the house, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Help me find peace." In that moment, I realized that Mrs. Thompson had been trapped in this house, her spirit unable to move on. I looked back at my friends, who were all terrified. "We have to help her," I said, my voice steady. "No way, we need to get out," Jake shouted, panic rising. But I couldn't leave her. "What if we find something that can help her move on?" I said, trying to convince them. "Fine, but we have to be quick," Sarah said, her voice trembling. I began searching through the boxes more frantically, flipping through old papers and photographs. I found another Picturia family portrait. The woman was in it, smiling with a little boy beside her. This is her family, I realized, my heart breaking for her. She lost them. The whispers quieted slightly, and I felt the temperature drop. "What if we find a way to honor her memory?" I suggested. "Maybe it will help her find peace." Jake nodded reluctantly, still looking terrified. We gathered around the boxes, searching for anything that could help. Suddenly, I found an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it carefully, revealing Mrs. Thompson's thoughts and memories. As I read, I learned about her life, the joy she felt when her son was born, the love she had for her family, and the pain of losing them all too soon. "This is it," I said, showing the diary to my friends. "We need to read it out loud. It will honor her memory." Are you sure?" Liam asked, glancing back at the figure. "Yes," I replied, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. We formed a circle, holding hands as I read the diary aloud. The whispers faded, replaced by a soft, gentle breeze. As I read about her family and her love for them, I felt the room begin to change. Those dark and foreboding began to glow with a warm light. I continued reading, pouring my heart into the words honoring her life and memories. Finally, I reached the last entry. "I hope to be reunited with my family one day," I read, my voice filled with emotion. As I finished, a warm light enveloped us, and the figure of Mrs. Thompson smiled at us. Her expression shifted from sorrow to peace, and I could feel the weight lifting from the room. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now clear and soothing. "Thank you for helping me find my way." With that, she faded away, leaving behind a gentle warmth that filled the cellar. The whispers ceased, and the room felt calm for the first time. We stood there in silence, the realization of what we had just done sinking in. Did we really help her? Sarah asked, tears in her eyes. I think we did, I replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. As we made our way back up the stairs, the door opened easily this time. The house felt different, lighter, almost welcoming. We stepped outside, the moon shining brightly above us. Let's never come back here again, Jake said, laughing nervously. I agree, Liam added, looking relieved. But deep down, I felt a sense of closure. We had faced our fears and helped a lost soul find peace. As we walked back to town, I knew that Halloween would never be the same for us again. It had become a night of courage, friendship, and unexpected journeys into the unknown. And even though the house stood ominously at the end of the street, I felt a sense of peace. Mrs. Thompson was finally free, and I hoped that she had found her way back to her family. That Halloween night taught me that some ghosts are not just about fear. They are about love, loss, and the hope of finding peace in the darkness. My name is Sam, and I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in a small town, I thought those spooky stories were just tales to scare kids. But that all changed one Halloween night when I went camping with my friends in Hollow Oak Forest. Hollow Oak Forest was known for its dark trees and eerie sounds. The locals often said that strange things happened there, especially around Halloween. I had heard the stories of people getting lost, of shadows moving when no one was around, and of whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. My friends, Lisa and Mark, thought it would be fun to camp there and test our bravery. I thought it was just a silly idea, but I didn't want to miss out on the adventure. We arrived at the forest just as the sun began to set. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches twisting like skeletal hands. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped out of the car. This place is perfect for a Halloween scare, Lisa said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Yeah, perfect for a horror movie, I replied, trying to laugh it off. We set up our tent near a clearing, surrounded by towering trees. The air was cool and crisp, and the smell of damp earth filled my nose. As darkness fell, we built a fire to keep warm. The flames danced wildly, casting flickering shadows around us. I brought marshmallows, Lisa exclaimed, pulling a bag from her backpack. We roasted them over the fire, the sweet smell mixing with the earthy scent of the forest. For a while, we forgot about the creepy stories and just enjoyed the evening. But as the fire crackled, the forest seemed to come alive. The wind rustled through the leaves, creating a soft whispering sound. I tried to ignore it, but it felt as if the trees were watching us. Do you think anyone else is camping out here? Mark asked, glancing around. Who would be crazy enough to camp here on Halloween? I joked, but deep down, I hoped he was right. After we finished eating, we sat around the fire, telling scary stories. Each tale made the atmosphere more tense. When it was my turn, I told them about a ghost that haunted the woods, searching for lost souls. I saw Lisa shiver, and Mark rolled his eyes. Come on, it's just a story, he said. But even he looked a bit uneasy. As the night wore on, we decided to explore the area a little. We grabbed our flashlights and ventured deeper into the forest, laughing and joking to keep our spirits up. But the deeper we went, the quieter the woods became. The rustling leaves turned into an eerie silence that made my heart race. Guys, this isn't funny anymore, I said, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. Let's just go a bit further, Lisa urged, her voice shaky but filled with excitement. We pressed on until we reached a small clearing with an old twisted oak tree in the center. It looked ancient, its bark gnarled and cracked. This tree is creepy, Mark said, shining his flashlight on it. The beam flickered against the dark bark, making shadows dance around us. Suddenly, we heard a low, faint whisper. It was so soft that I thought I was imagining it. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hear what? Mark replied, his bravado fading. Like someone was talking, I said, glancing around nervously. I think it's just the wind, Lisa said, but even she sounded unsure. As we stood there, the whisper came again, clearer this time. It sounded like a child calling out, but the words were too muffled to understand. My heart began to race, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. "We should go back," I said, feeling a knot of fear in my stomach. "Wait, let's check it out," Mark insisted, moving closer to the tree. I wanted to argue, but something in his eyes told me he was curious. Against my better judgment, I followed him. As we approached the tree, the whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a cold breeze. I shined my flashlight on the tree, and something glimmered in the light, a small, weathered toy, half buried in the leaves. It looked like a doll, its features worn away and its clothes tattered. "Look at this," Mark said, picking it up. As he held the doll, the whispers grew louder, sounding almost frantic. I felt a chill run through me. "We should put that down. It feels wrong," I said, backing away. But Mark didn't listen. "It's just a toy. What's the big deal?" He scoffed. Suddenly, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. It felt like the forest was alive, angry. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place. The whispers turned into shouts, echoing around us, and then everything went silent. Then, in the stillness, we heard a low growl behind us. We turned around, but there was nothing there. My heart raced as I felt the weight of unseen eyes on us. "Guys, we need to go back now," I urged. Okay, just put the doll down first," Lisa said, her voice shaking. Mark hesitated, glancing at the doll as if it held some kind of power. Finally, he tossed it away, and we all turned to leave. But just as we turned, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. A shadow darted between the trees, just beyond the reach of our flashlights. I froze, the blood draining from my face. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "What?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "There was something. Over there," I pointed, my finger trembling. Mark and Lisa looked, but whatever it was had vanished into the darkness. "You're just imagining things, Sam," Mark said, though his voice was less confident now. We hurried back toward the campsite, the whispers fading behind us. But the feeling of being watched remained. When we reached our tent, I felt a bit of relief, but it didn't last long. As we settled down for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind howled outside, and the tent creaked with every gust. It was hard to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the doll and the whispers. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of rustling outside our tent. My heart pounded as I listened closely. "Mark?" I whispered, but there was no answer. I unzipped the tent just a little and peeked outside. The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the clearing. Everything looked normal, but the air was thick with tension. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Suddenly, I heard it again, the whispering. It was clearer now, almost right next to me. "Help! Help!" It sounded like a child's voice, pleading for something. My blood ran cold. "Guys!" I called out, shaking my friends awake. "Did you hear that?" "What?" Mark mumbled, still half asleep. The whispers. "There, right outside," I said, my voice rising in panic. Lisa sat up, her eyes wide with fear. "You're just dreaming, Sam," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "No, I'm serious. Listen," I whispered. We all fell silent, and the whispering returned, more urgent this time. "Help me, please." It sent chills down my spine. "Okay, that's creepy," Mark said, sitting up straighter. We exchanged worried glances. "What do we do?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe stay in the tent," I suggested, feeling a wave of dread wash over me. But before we could decide, the whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, growling noise. It sounded close, too close. "Let's get out of here," Mark said, his face pale. We quickly grabbed our things, adrenaline pumping through our veins. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the darkness. The forest was still, but I felt an uneasy presence surrounding us. "Where do we go?" Lisa asked, looking around frantically. "Back to the car," Mark said, and we started running in that direction. The shadows seemed to reach out for us, and the whispers returned, echoing through the trees. "Help me. Help me." We stumbled through the underbrush, our flashlights flickering as the batteries started to die. Every rustle made me jump, and I felt as if something was chasing us. "Faster!" I shouted, pushing myself harder. Finally, we broke through the trees and saw the car in the distance. Relief washed over me as we sprinted toward it, but when we reached the vehicle, I froze. The doors were open, and the interior was a mess. "What happened?" Lisa cried, looking inside. "Did someone break in?" Mark asked, panic rising in his voice. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," I said, my heart racing. As we turned to leave, the whispers became a cacophony of voices surrounding us. "Help us! Help us!" Panic set in as I glanced around. "What do they want?" I yelled, desperation creeping into my voice. "Run!" Mark shouted, grabbing my arm. We took off down the dirt road leading away from the forest. The whispers grew fainter behind us, but the feeling of dread lingered. When we finally reached the edge of the forest, we collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The darkness loomed behind us, and I could still hear the echoes of the whispers. "What was that?" Lisa panted, shaking. "I don't know, but I never want to find out," I said, my heart still racing. We sat in silence for a moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. "Do you think it was the doll?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "It must be," I replied. "We shouldn't have taken it. We should have left it there." We looked back at the dark outline of the forest, now just a shadow in the night. I felt a wave of regret wash over me. "Let's just get out of here," Lisa said, and we all agreed. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us from the trees. The whispers faded into the distance, but they would haunt me forever. That Halloween night changed everything for me. I realized that the stories I once thought were silly had some truth to them. I still think about that night in Hollow Oak Forest, and I wonder if the whispers ever find someone else to call for help. Halloween has always been my favorite time of the year. I love the cool October air, the smell of fallen leaves, and the thrill of dressing up. This year I decided to go as a witch, with a pointy hat, a dark cape, and even a broom. I felt ready to take on the night and fill my candy bag until it was heavy enough to drag home. As the sky darkened, I met up with my friends, and we set off down the sidewalk, laughing and chatting as we went from house to house. Each home was decorated with glowing pumpkins, spooky skeletons, and fake spider webs that hung in the bushes. It was perfect. But then, something strange happened. After an hour or so, we decided to take a break by the edge of a small wooded park at the end of the street. We were counting our candy when I noticed a figure standing near the entrance to the park. The stranger wore a long, dark cloak and a mask that covered his entire face. It looked old, cracked in places, with only tiny slits for the eyes and mouth. I couldn't tell if the mask was supposed to be scary or just strange, but something about it made me uneasy. "Hey, look over there," I whispered to my friends, nodding toward the figure. "Oh, creepy," one of them whispered back. But we all laughed, figuring he was just someone in costume, trying to scare people. After all, it was Halloween. We continued with our trick-or-treating, and I tried to forget about the masked stranger. But as we walked to the next house, I noticed him again. This time, he was standing at the end of the street, facing us. He was still as a statue, just watching. The sight of him sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe we should go the other way," I suggested. One of my friends laughed nervously. "Why? He's just trying to creep us out. Let's keep going." Reluctantly, I followed. We went to the next house, collecting candy and trying to ignore the feeling that someone was watching us. But when I glanced over my shoulder, he was still there, standing in the shadows, watching. And then, he began to walk toward us. I froze. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. His head was tilted slightly, as though studying us, and the mask glinted in the dim light from the street lamp. My friends noticed him too, and we all exchanged uneasy glances. "Let's go," I whispered. "Now." We started walking quickly, our footsteps echoing on the quiet street. Every so often I glanced back, and each time the masked stranger was still there, following us. His pace never changed, but he kept getting closer and closer. We rounded the corner, trying to lose him, and ducked behind a row of bushes in someone's front yard. We huddled together, hearts pounding, listening for footsteps. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe we'd lost him. I let out a small sigh of relief and laughed nervously. See? He was probably just trying to freak us out. But then a face appeared around the corner of the bushes. It was him, masked stranger, closer than ever. We screamed, jumping to our feet and running down the street, candy bags forgotten in our rush to escape. We sprinted past houses, down sidewalks, through yards, until my lungs felt like they were on fire. Finally, we reached my house, and we dashed up the steps and slammed the door behind us, locking it tight. My friends and I leaned against the door, gasping for breath and laughing with relief. But the laughter stopped when we looked out the window. He was standing in my front yard, completely still, his head tilted in that eerie, unnatural way. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt like they were locked on me, staring through the mask. I didn't know what to do. My mom was out, and I didn't want to call the police over what might be a Halloween prank. But he just stood there watching, as if waiting for something. Then, after what felt like hours, he turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the darkness. The next day, I told my mom about what happened, and she shook her head, saying it was probably just a Halloween prank. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that mask, those empty eyes staring at me from the street. I almost convinced myself it was over, but just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint knock on my window. I turned over, heart pounding, and there, outside my window, was the masked stranger. His face pressed close to the glass, watching me.